But let us keep moving on. I want to bring to you, I'm going to read her bio. Dr. Deanna Minich. She has her master's in science, a PhD, and a certified nutrition specialist. Is that correct? She's a certified functional medicine practitioner. Okay. She is a specialist in the nutrition of science. She's an international lecturer. She's an educator and an author with over 20 years of experience in academia and in the food and dietary supplement industries. She's currently serving as Chief Science Officer at Symphony Natural Health. She has been active as a functional medicine clinician. I love functional medicine and integrative health in clinical trials. We need more clinical trials. And in her own practice, follow up with her after this at foodandspirit.com. Is that the website? She is the author of 6 consumer books on wellness topics. Okay, everybody, we're in here talking about wellness, personal wellness, and wellness for your work site. I think we should get some of these books. 4 chapters and now 50 science publications. And we believe in science, and we love information that is supported by research. Her academic background is nutrition science, including a master's degree in human nutrition and dietetics from the University of Illinois in Chicago, and a doctorate, PhD in medical sciences from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands.
You got it.
Okay, she has served on the nutrition advisory. I'm messing up names and types.
No, you're doing great.
She on the board of directors for the American Nutrition Association. Currently, she teaches for the Institute of Functional Medicine, the University of Western States, the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, and for the Institute of Brain Potential. And that's how I found out about her. I take courses through the Institute for Brain Potential to get nursing continuing education credits. And I remember I did one of her courses, and I was like, I have to get her for our members at MESSA. Through her talks, workshops, groups, and in-person retreats, she helps people to practically and artfully transform their lives through nutrition and lifestyle. Visit her at deannaminich.com. You have the floor, Dr. Deanna.
Wow. And thank you, everybody, for braving that long bio. That was a lot of information. But basically, I'm here to educate. I love to serve in the way of providing nutrition information. I grew up with a very health conscious mother. And I grew up in the 1970s when it wasn't really trendy to be into health and nutrition. And I can still remember my mother saying to me, the whiter the bread, the quicker you're dead. So I think that from a very young age, I've always had nutrition brought into my life. I never thought I would go on to study it, but that's what ended up happening. And now I get to share it with everybody. And now it's so trendy. It's really hot. It's really emerging to know what you need to eat in order to deal with different things. So I'm here in service to you. Thank you, Rhonda, for having me. It's great to be back. What I want you all to be doing, because I'm sure that when you came into this presentation, you were already thinking about questions for yourself. So what I want you to do is in the chat already start to populate with your questions, because I want to be sure that we do get through them in the hour that we have together. So initially, Rhonda had asked me to put together a presentation about menopause and what we could do for the nutrition needs for women in menopause. And then we expanded it out into talking about, well, what about all the women that are premenopausal? So they are still having a menstrual cycle. What about the women that are going through perimenopause and things are starting to get irregular? And then what about the women that have gone through the transition or they're going through it and now they have the rest of their lives? And as Rhonda was saying before I came on, I do think that we're learning more. We're learning more in the science, and it's really exciting. And also, I'll just help you with some tips because I've just recently gone through menopause myself, and I've been in the throes of the literature, natural products. I can answer questions about dietary supplements. along with talking about nutrition. So that's where we are. I can't give you exact guidance on your own health. However, I can give you some general education. All right. And what I would say too, Rhonda said that she likes functional medicine. She has been to the Institute for Brain Potential talks. If you are interested in this information and you want to start to apply it, I would strongly recommend that you find a practitioner who is holistic, nutrition oriented. Maybe they do integrative and or functional medicine, and they can help you to put all of this into action. And in fact, that's what you can use the 2-page handout for. You can bring it to your practitioner and you could say, I've been really interested in how nutrition can start to play a role in my health. So, within our talk today, we're going to talk specifically about food and hormones. What are hormones? Hormones are communicators in our bodies. They are produced in small amounts, but they have great impact. They can change our behavior, our satiety, our appetite, our weight, our feelings, our sleep state. Really and truly, once you start to look at hormones, you start to realize how much they play a role in every single thing about us. We cannot remove ourselves from the effects of hormones. To talk, how can you direct your hormones with the help of nutrition? And then, as Rhonda requested, we're going to talk about nutrition tips at every stage of life for a woman because they are going to vary. A woman in her 20s has different nutritional needs than a woman in her 50s, than a woman in her 80s. So, we're going to talk about that a little bit. But I want you to keep in mind, too, that you have to personalize this. I'm going to be talking about general tips, but you are special. And everybody has their own needs depending on where they live, what they have access to, and what their health condition is. So, the way I like to think about a woman's journey is that you have a hero and you have a heroine. A heroine's journey, a woman's journey is kind of a spiraled one. It's kind of cyclical. Many times we move with the rhythms of the moon, and that has been shown scientifically that the lunar cycle can change and be connected to a woman's hormonal status. And some things I think that we come up against as women over and over in our lives, but yet we're in a different place and we get to reevaluate it. And that could be our body, our behaviors. There are so many great books about how do we change behavior, because I bet that as we go through this presentation, many of you are already thinking, well, I knew that. She didn't have to tell me that. So then the question is, like Rhonda was saying, how do you create a checklist? I know for myself, I wear a watch. I like to track my steps. I like to track my sleep. I like to look at these numbers because I do think if you don't test it, then you won't change it. Not as easily. You have to somehow track it and find ways to keep you motivated. All right. So, in terms of understanding a woman's journey, what are we talking about here? Because I talked about these 3 phases for women: the premenopause, and we're going to talk about, see, I think in color. So I'm going to track each of these phases of a woman's life with different colors. So premenopause, I'm going to be focusing on orange and yellow. Perimenopause, I'm going to look at green and blue green. And then menopause is like if you can imagine an indigo butterfly, the state of transformation and so much wisdom and change. We're going to look at indigo and purple. So there are certain themes that I think emerge throughout a woman's life, whether it is creativity, maybe she is focused on compassion and expansion of her heart as she raises a family. And then maybe towards the end of her life, she starts to think about her purpose, her vision, her mission. What is her legacy? What would she like to leave to all of the other generations? So I look at things in a very physical, physiologic, but also a psychological perspective. So let's talk a little bit about premenopause. Let's talk about when women are developing into being fertile and being able to create life in their bodies. So looking at the reproductive system. And when I think of the reproductive system, I think of water. the tides of estrogen and progesterone moving through us. There's a lot of creativity because what is reproduction in the body? It is creativity. So, looking at these physical and psychological needs of our lives. So, when I think about nutrition for reproductive health, and by the way, I think that so many women are experiencing infertility and issues with their menstrual cycle. So when I think of nutrition here of what we need to focus on, we really need to be looking at the gut. Believe it or not, we need to be looking at the gut. Gut health is the area of focus in part because the ovaries, the uterus share a very close connection with things like the small intestine and the large intestine. So if you have a healthy gut, you may have a healthy ovaries and uterus. If your gut is unhealthy and it has too much in the way of unhealthy microorganisms, then you might actually see that you have issues like inflammation in the ovaries and or uterus. So we want to be focusing on the gut. I'm going to get to the gut shortly. We'll go a little bit deeper into that. Looking at healthy fats is important because fats are part of every cell membrane. And the healthier the cell is, the healthier the cell can reproduce. So, one of the things I think about is omega 3s and omega 6s, which we'll talk a little bit about. And then psychologically, I think what women can be reflecting on here is making sure that they have healthy emotions, that they're getting those emotions out. You know, on my watch, I have a little signal that comes up to me during the day, and it'll say, record how you feel. And I believe that for many women, we're so busy, we don't have time to feel anymore. And feeling is just as important as thinking or being in our bodies and having activity that's physical. So I think that for our reproductive cycle, when we start to feel the flux of these different hormones, we're going to be feeling certain things throughout the month. So, how does this change throughout a woman's life cycle, and what would be the imbalances, and how do you know that there are imbalances in her reproductive health? Well, you might see infertility, which is surely on the rise, and that might also be from increased toxins in the environment, things like plastic. We need to get plastics out of the environment or reduce our exposure to them or improve our elimination of toxins through things like sweating. Believe it or not, we release small plastics in our sweat. We need to move those things out of the body so that we are clear and connected to our sense of reproduction. Other things would be if we have an imbalanced menstrual cycle, maybe we get kind of moody around the menstrual period. Maybe we go into premature menopause. For some women, they are now going through menopause in their early 30s. And that is not typical. Typically, what you see is that you go through perimenopause for about 5 to 7 years before menopause. And I'll talk about the different structured areas of menopause and what that means. But now we're seeing a much longer time of when a woman is out of balance. So we need to look at that. We need to look at keeping those ovaries healthy with orange colored foods. And then, of course, psychologically, looking at our relationships, looking at sexual health. How do we manage emotions within that? So, one of the things that happens within a cycling woman is the dance of estrogen and progesterone. So, you can see here at the bottom, you can see that there are hormones that are fluxing throughout a woman's body. So, we have the rise of estrogen during the first part of the cycle, that's the follicular phase. And then we have the rise of progesterone towards the second half of the cycle, and that's called the luteal phase. We also have some other hormones as well, FSH and LH, but really the key ones are estrogen and progesterone. And the estrogen and progesterone are responsible for building up the uterine lining and then leading to the breakdown if there is no fertilization. The other thing I want you to look at up here at the top of the slide, because I'm going to talk about some nutrition related to this, is that the process of a healthy egg forming in the ovary is connected to nutrition, actually. It's connected to vitamin A, it's connected to beta carotene, it's connected to orange, yellow, and red colorful plant foods. So, this corpus luteum, the corpus albicans, and that whole process is actually connected through things that we have in our diet. So, for some women, as I mentioned, there are going to be some issues here with PMS. I'm sure you might have heard of premenstrual syndrome. And in those cases, there can be issues with changes in the estrogen and the progesterone, especially in that luteal phase, that late luteal phase, right before a woman gets her menstrual period. There can be some issues there. So let's talk about what are some nutritional factors that are linked with mood disorders related to the menstrual cycle. So PMS, premenstrual syndrome, and premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So where there's a mood imbalance. Because I don't know about you, but many of us think that some of these things are healthy. Like, oh, we're just supposed to be moody around our cycle and binge and be sleeping in a kind of a dysfunctional way. But this is reflecting in part some of the lifestyle. So, what we see when it comes to food is that the Western ultra processed diets, so the things that we have on the go that typically are brown, yellow, and white, are more associated with PMS symptoms, while traditional diets with whole foods, we're talking about a mixture of vegetables, fruits, lean protein, healthy fats, that we see a benefit there. And that's kind of obvious, right? We would think that having a more traditional diet, having a healthier diet with whole foods would connect into our mood state and into how our body performs. And indeed, we do see that there is a connection here with PMS. However, it's a little bit challenging to talk about specific foods as there isn't a lot of data for looking at PMS, but I just think it hasn't been studied as well. And at least this is in one particular study. But you do see that there are some nutrients that are really important for metabolism and mood, things like B vitamins, which we would find in legumes, vegetables, and whole grains. The other thing I want to mention too is as we think about the monthly cycle, all those different days, what happens is that our nutrients change across the menstrual cycle, believe it or not. So maybe on day 17 of her cycle, she actually has different levels of things like zinc and magnesium compared to what she had perhaps later, like on day 28. So that might be responsible for some of the mood issues or maybe some of the energy and fatigue that she might feel. And you can imagine that a woman that has just completed menstruation, she's going to be low in certain minerals that would be in blood, certain things like iron, zinc, copper, magnesium, even manganese. This is another element. So we need to be really attentive to minerals. And if a woman is iron deficient, she's going to have even more issues with that recovering from that blood loss from menstruation. So, magnesium is important. Magnesium is important for blood sugar balance. And in fact, so many people are low in magnesium. You want to be sure you're getting enough magnesium. I can talk about that if you have questions about it. But you get magnesium from nuts, from grains, from a lot of the same foods that you would find B vitamins in. And when it comes to zinc, zinc is important for the immune system. And what some women observe through their cycle is they have a change in immune function. They might start to feel more susceptible or vulnerable to certain infections or getting colds or flus at certain times of their cycles if they're really paying attention. And that might be connected to low zinc. Zinc is really important to heal the body inside. It's very important for healthy immune system function. So, where do we get zinc? We get it from foods that tend to be high in protein. Seafood, like oysters, is one of the top sources, believe it or not. But then also nuts, seeds can be high in zinc, but typically seafood and animal protein sources, if somebody eats those foods. And if they don't, then getting it from legumes and grains and nuts and seeds. Now, the other thing to be thinking about, which may alleviate some of the symptoms related to PMS and some of the issues with reproductive health, is what you might have heard of as phytoestrogens. Phyto means plant. So these are plant estrogens. So within plant foods, plants, by the way, are remarkable. And I do think, I know Rhonda has heard me talk about this through my IBP talks, but there is so much science to support eating plant foods. That doesn't mean that you have to be a vegan or a vegetarian. It just means that we need to have these plant foods because they have fiber, they have minerals, they have vitamins. And for women, especially cycling women who have symptoms, they have phytoestrogens, which may help to balance some of the estrogen in her body. Now, if you look on the right here, you can see a list of some of those plant foods that would contain phytoestrogens. And some people question, well, what about soy? I don't know about soy. I've heard good things, I've heard bad things. Well, what I would say is if you look at the literature, there's a lot of good data on soy, but soy in its natural whole food form. And what I mean by that is tofu, tempeh, miso. I'm not talking about processed soy or refined soy products like soy burgers, soy hot dogs, or a lot of these different processed foods, right? I'm talking about how they eat soy in Asia, which is fermented. And when the soy goes through that fermentation process, it actually produces even better things for the body. So keep that in mind. But if you have an allergy to soy, obviously you don't want to eat it. If you have an allergy to any of these foods, you don't want to eat them, right? So, flaxseed is another great one. I like to put flaxseed meal. So that's when the seed is already ground up. You can put that into things like smoothies. And the flaxseed meal keeps the gut healthy and it keeps hormones healthy. So even if you are not having a menstrual period, you can still reap the benefits of soy, flaxseed, and a number of these phytoestrogens. Now, some people might be thinking, well, Deanna, I've had a hormone sensitive cancer. Maybe I shouldn't be bringing in more estrogen. You can talk with your doctor about that. There are different sides to the story on how to use plants in the way of helping to tame the more aggressive estrogen in our body. So I just wanted to mention that. And also, many times the ability of these foods to work really well in our body depends on how healthy our gut microbiome is. Now, these days, you can actually go to a practitioner, especially one that practices along functional medicine or integrative medicine lines, and you can provide a stool sample to actually look at what kind of gut microbiome you have. You can look at whether or not your gut is inflamed. So keep that in mind. We have a lot more capability in this day and age to get intelligence on what is going on in our bodies so that we can tailor our foods accordingly. Okay, orange. Orange is the color I'm focusing on here. Orange fruits seem to have a connection to improving the health of the ovaries. They even kind of look like ovaries. They're round, they're circular, they're orange, filled with carotenoids. So let me just walk you through this because there's some really interesting science looking at eating orange fruits and ovaries. So in ovarian health, and this is in women of various ages. So when I'm talking about orange fruits, I'm talking about mandarins, like the small looking oranges, oranges themselves, or tangerines. And I know that not all of these orange fruits are in season throughout the year, so you have to just gauge that. There are also, and I know, Michigan, you have a lot of cherries and other things at certain times of the year, but we don't all live in tropical areas, right? And some of us might be snowbirds. We go to warmer places at certain times of the year. So do your best to bring in these foods when they are in season. Tropical fruits like papaya, peaches, and persimmons, these are also in season during certain times of the year, and they would give you those carotenoids that we need to help the ovaries. Not only do they contain these plant compounds called carotenoids, but also vitamin C and bioflavonoids. Now, one of the interesting thing about these orange foods that they found in the research was that you could help to delay the decline of the ovaries slightly by having more of these orange foods. And it looked like that there was a connection to a carotenoid, and you don't need to remember this, but it was called beta cryptozanthin. So having about 400 micrograms of beta cryptozanthin per day was shown to have the potential to delay ovarian decline or ovarian aging. In other words, you can keep your ovaries more vital, which is a good thing to do, by having these orange foods that are rich in a certain carotenoid. There was another study, a large study. It was called the Nurses' Health Study, and it demonstrated that higher fruits, especially citrus fruits, was correlated with decreased risk for endometriosis, which is an inflammatory condition of the uterus. And again, they found that that same carotenoid was correlated with the lower risk. So, what's the takeaway for you? Whether you are having a menstrual period or not, orange fruits help keep the ovaries very vital. Now, I also mentioned vitamin A. Some of the vitamin A precursors, like beta carotene, I'm sure you've all heard of beta carotene. Beta carotene is found in things like carrots. Again, another orange food. Beta carotene in the body, once it gets into the body, it can convert into vitamin A. This is how many people who are vegetarian or vegan tend to get their vitamin A, because the active form of vitamin A is only found in animal foods or in eggs, in meat. So you need to focus on beta carotene if you're not eating animal foods. And what we see is that the vitamin A, which is good for many things, by the way, not just reproductive health, it's good for the immune system, it's good for the turnover of the gut. It's an essential vitamin. But what we see is that it's important for the development of the testes in boys and the ovaries in girls as they're developing, and eventually looking at the hormones that are produced. And oocyte here just means the egg, the maturation of the egg. So having a follicle that develops into an egg is in part connected to vitamin A levels. Now, vitamin A is also called retinol. And what we see in polycystic ovarian syndrome, which many young women are now having, we see that in the 20s, the 30s, even into the 40s. What we see is that there's some issue with vitamin A. So it would be a good idea for a woman with PCOS to get her vitamin A tested by a doctor to look at that, as well as things like her blood sugar and her insulin. Those two things are also connected sometimes in PCOS. It's kind of interesting because when in studies where they took out the ovaries and analyzed them, they found a number of the different plant compounds, the orange compounds, some of the yellow, some of the red compounds, and different levels of these plant compounds, the carotenoids, were found at different parts of the menstrual cycle. And also, different levels were found in cancerous tissue compared with healthy tissue. So, what does that tell us? That tells us that we need to be really attentive to making sure we have enough of these plant compounds in our diet if we want our ovaries to be healthy. And again, it doesn't matter if we're premenopausal, perimenopausal, or postmenopausal, those orange foods are important. In fact, in some animal studies, we don't see this in humans because this work just hasn't been done yet, but having beta carotene was correlated with greater progesterone levels and better ovarian function. So, what is your takeaway here? Beta carotene, orange foods, vitamin A, and just making sure that you get at least a serving of orange foods on a daily basis. I did mention that I would talk about the gut. There are some connections here to the microbiome, and it's a two-way relationship. The gut impacts the gynecological organs. The gynecological organs impact the gut. So think about them as very much connected. And so anytime you have an issue with your ovaries, your uterus, any kind of imbalance, you want to be exploring the gut. Not many people realize this, but there's good literature to suggest that there is this interrelationship. In fact, the gut microbiome is responsible for metabolizing estrogen. And if you have a leaky gut, there may be some issues with hormones. Okay. So, and we don't only just have a gut microbiome, we also have a vaginal microbiome. We have an oral microbiome, we have a nasal microbiome, we have a scalp microbiome, we have a skin microbiome. So, there are all these populations of microorganisms that are working with us, right? And we want to create a healthy terrain for them. So, the way we create a healthy terrain is we give them a diverse blend of foods that are rich in fiber, that are rich from plant compounds. And I want you to remember this last point here on the slide. Less gut microbiome diversity is associated with menopause. So, in other words, as a woman goes through menopause, what ends up happening is that her microbiome starts to shift and start to look more like a man's microbiome. Now, we don't know if that's good, bad, indifferent, but what we know is that there's some significant changes here which tell us that hormones are responsible for the gut microbiome populations. There is a two-way street happening here. So as you start to go through menopause, and even if you're having issues with your menstrual cycle, you want to be thinking of keeping your gut healthy. In fact, in functional medicine, many times we say, when you don't know where to start with the gut. The gut is a huge portal to so many things, including the foods that you're eating. The other thing I want to mention, because we're talking about the water element here, bringing in the many different, I would say, the states of water that could be in a broth, right? Like a bone broth, especially for women who are losing bone mineral density. So bringing in collagen with that water or that broth. Just making sure that we're hydrated, right? Because hydration is part of nutrition. It often gets overlooked. And how do we even tell if we're properly hydrated, right? There are not many ways to detect that unless you go in for a blood draw and look at your serum sodium level. So basically, we have to be attentive to our urination pattern. What color is our urine? If it's deeply hued as a yellow urine, then we probably need more water unless we're taking B vitamins, which can turn our urine yellow. But basically, let's make sure that we get enough hydration. This is the name of the game. And it's also important. I mentioned sweating already. I just posted on my Facebook page how important it is to sweat. Through our sweat, we lose pro inflammatory cytokines, so things that are increasing inflammation. We lose cortisol, so it lets off some of our stress. And we also sweat out things like heavy metals, phthalates, and bisphenol A. Those last two ones are endocrine disruptors. So, women, we need to sweat. We need to sweat all throughout our life cycle. And if we don't sweat very easily, you can use a skin brush, brush the skin before you go out for a run, a walk, sit in a sauna. But basically, sweating is a really good thing and not jamming up our sweat glands with antiperspirants, right? That's really important. And when you're sweating, don't forget to bring back those minerals, as I mentioned to you before, the zinc, the magnesium, selenium, calcium. I mean, all of those minerals, the salts, they are important as well. The other thing that I'm just going to kind of summarize here, some of the things to remember for healthy reproductive health: having healthy fats, keeping our cell membranes in integrity. And real quick, there is a test that you can do online to look at your levels of omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids create a healthy cell membrane. They are also anti-inflammatory and they help with fertility, as well as many other things, even hot flashes. Adequate hydration. That's why You've got to have your jug, your glass next to you. You have to remember that, have that as a prompt so that you're constantly drinking throughout the day. And then for some of you, you might need more plant-based hormonal support. In fact, another study that I just posted was on swapping out rice in the diet of Asian people. This was done in Taiwanese women. Swapping out rice and putting in yams also led to better levels of hormones and less symptoms. And don't forget those beautiful orange, yellow, and green, red plant foods, right? They're going to be important for giving us antioxidants and just helping with healthy ovulation. All right, moving on here through the spectrum, we're going to move into yellow, the premenopause. We're going to focus on heat, appropriately so. And what gives us a lot of transformative heat? Carbohydrate, right? But many of you have probably been told you need to limit your carbs. Well, we're going to talk about what kind of carbs to limit. We're talking about the starchy carbohydrates that increase your blood sugar and not the fibrous kind. And during this time of life, when I see like typically the 40s, this is where a woman really needs to look at her work life balance. She needs to start looking at her energy level because our mitochondria is within our cells and cranking out energy for us. And what is the first thing that a woman starts to lose as she moves through her life cycle? She starts to lose a lot of energy. She's giving to family, she's giving to work, she's not taking care of self. And Rhonda was just talking about the previous speaker talking about self care. And here's where we look at fire, the burnout of life. Either fire can inspire us and really like ignite us in the way of our passion. But if it becomes unhealthy and we're always burning the candle at both ends, what happens? We start to see insulin resistance. Our blood sugar starts to spike or dip. We start to get cravings for sugar and processed carbohydrate to spike our fire. We start to lose sight of what satisfies us from a food perspective. We're always hungry. It's like we're taking in all this food, but we're actually not nourishing ourselves. So, how do we control that burnout? Well, one of the ways we do that is by taking care of the gut. We need to align to the fire of the gut. In fact, in traditional medicine systems, they look at the gut as a source of fire or a source of transformation. It's where we take food, which you see on the left, on the right here. You see food comes in, we break it down, we absorb it, then it goes into our body and it goes through our mitochondria for energy and we become that food. So the question is, do we want to become foods that are processed, foods that are devoid of any nutrients? We become emptiness, right? We become hungry all the time then. What we want to take in is the most nutrient dense, jam packed food possible. So as we get older, many times what happens is we eat less. So we have to make even more attempts to have nutrient dense foods during the later years so that we are ensuring that we get the nutrition we need to give us energy to do the things that we want to do in life, right? So the mitochondria, those little powerhouses in the cell, they are releasing energy, they are releasing ATP. And what happens as we move into our 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond is we start to see issues with the mitochondria. Why is that? Well, because they kind of get jammed up. They get jammed up with a lot of energy and it's almost like they need to clean house. And in fact, in science, there's a name for that. It's called mitophagy. It's where the mitochondria cleans up the old dead mitochondria. You know, we constantly have mitochondria renewing themselves in our cells. So that's why a little bit of nightly fasting. So, what do I mean by that? 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, not taking in a lot of snacks and sitting on the couch, right? Our digestive fire is at its low in the evening. That's circadian rhythm. So, what will help our mitochondria? What actually gives us energy? It is cleaning house and having that nighttime where we're not eating foods. And the morning, the breakfast, we start our day, we break our fast, and we get going with that energy. So when our gut and our hormones are not in rhythm, what we tend to see is we see inflammation in the gut. Okay. This is called leaky gut. I'm sure you've heard of this. Cortisol, which is a stress hormone, can change the gut. In fact, there is some data to suggest that even one acute stressful response can change the gut microbiome. So we have to constantly renew the gut microbiome, be eating good foods to help to bring the terrain back from where it was in the stress state. So when leaky gut, leaky ovaries. Again, think of the gut and the ovaries as connected. And again, polycystic ovarian syndrome, if there's an issue with the ovaries, it might be linked to the gut and the overgrowth in the gut. That's why getting a stool test and going to a doctor and evaluating the gut microbiome is really important. Okay, so Deanna, what do we eat? Well, let's look at fiber containing foods. Fermented foods. What does that mean? Fermented vegetables. I just had some this morning. Believe it or not, I needed to take a picture of my breakfast this morning because I had a little bit of sauerkraut on my plate. That is a fermented food. And I know you might be wrinkling your nose like, ew, that sounds disgusting. But you know what? You can have fermented foods at any time of the day. You can have a pickle, a dill pickle for lunch. That is a fermented food. You can have fermented beets. You can have fermented vegetables. You can make your own fermented foods. They're powerful. And we hear so much about GLP-1 agonists. We hear so much about, oh my gosh, how do I stop myself from eating so much? Fermented foods, high fiber foods. This is plant intelligence that is telling the body what to do. Fiber is key. I know we've all heard about fiber. Nothing new there for you, right? But what we understand scientifically is how the fiber is working. Fiber nourishes the gut in times of stress. You need fiber when you're stressed, even more so. It's almost like many times when we get stressed, we stop eating so well. But actually, that's the time we need to eat even better. So when we are stressed, again, we start to degrade the gut. We start to get not such great microorganisms in the gut. We start to get, instead of our army that's protecting us, now we have an army that's attacking us on the inside. We need to promote a healthy mucus layer, not too much mucus. We need the right kind of mucus, not the kind from pathogenic organisms, but the good, healthy kind that blocks things from getting in. How do we do that? We do it through fiber. You see this long chain up at the top? Fiber is not small little itty bits of sugar. It's long chains of sugars that take time to digest. This is like if you think of a fish tank, and you know when you give the fish food to the fish and then they're gobbling it up for some time? This is like the food for the gut. You're sprinkling into the gut something that's going to keep them chewing and chomping over time. And then you're going to start to get all these different smaller compounds that are going to help the immune system, that are going to help hormones, that are going to help the inflammatory response. So I can't stress this enough. Fiber, fiber, fiber. These are good, healthy carbohydrates, and they come in the diet in a variety of forms, right? We might also be thinking of prebiotics. Some of you have heard that term, prebiotics. These are good, healthy gut bacteria that come from these fibers. And we look at inulin, galacto-oligosaccharides, beta-glucan, lactulose. Okay, these are a lot of fancy names of certain kinds of fibers. These certain prebiotic fibers take the gut and then speak to the brain and also speak to the heart. So that's why I say start with the gut if you're thinking about hormones, or even, when we start to lose hormones, the brain changes. We might have brain fog. How do you help that along? You work on the gut. You work on the gut with fibers of all types. One of my favorite types of prebiotic fibers is actually bananas, believe it or not. If you can get kind of a greener banana, again, we're focused on yellow here. So I'm thinking of, and you might say, but doesn't that increase blood sugar? Well, that's why you want a less ripe banana. And you have that together. Maybe you put that in a smoothie with, here's my smoothie recipe, actually. This is the one I actually have almost on a daily basis, but I change it up a little bit. I use flaxseed milk Then I bring in about 3/4 of an unripe banana. I then put in flaxseed meal, and then I put in 2 scoops of protein. Protein is essential, especially through the life cycle. We want protein at every meal. And then I might swap out a little bit of the different fibers. I might put in some berries, but essentially I try to bring in a little bit of that banana, but I'm blunting the glycemic response because now I put it within a matrix of other foods that are going to prevent it from spiking my blood sugar. But yet I'm going to have the prebiotic effects. The prebiotic fibers, whether it's the fruits, the vegetables that we're taking in, those break down into smaller, short chain fatty acids. That's what that SCFA stands for. The short chain fatty acids are things like acetate, propionate, butyrate. Those are the different smaller compounds that then go and essentially connect to the brain. So overall, all I could say here is you feel so much better when you work on your gut. We all know how we feel when our gut's not right, right? So having healthy carbohydrates, the starchy kind. And when I think of the fiber, I think of the kind of fiber that's like a mop. So the kind of fiber that's like a mop is like flaxseed meal. It's like legumes, whole grain fiber, a lot of fruit fiber, apple fiber, oat bran fiber. It has a lot of this swelling that works well with water. It's like a mop, right? It seeps up the water, it traps things. Then you have the kind of fiber that's like a broom. It does not swell, but it brushes along the gut to move things out and to create motility. So fiber, fiber, fiber. Write that one down. Put it on your computer so that you constantly remember how important it is to have fiber. Even a supplemental fiber like psyllium or other fibers, and rotate them so that you create different organisms in the gut. Probiotics can also be part of this, and also digestive enzymes. And I would say work with a practitioner again to deduce whether or not you might need additional digestive support. If you get bloated after a meal, that's telling me you're not digesting properly. There's something wrong there. So, natural sources of enzymes would be things like pineapple. In fact, a little bit of pineapple after a meal can help with the kind of finish up a lot of the digestion. So, pineapple, another yellow food. Lemon, when I think of lemon and lemon juice, just having a little bit of acidification, at least initially in the gut, which eventually can go into more of an alkalizing effect. Having a little bit of apple cider vinegar in your water before a meal. Some people like to do about a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar, which is also kind of yellow. That will further help to kind of get the whole process of digestion or transformation going. All right, we're moving into green. And I'm seeing lots of questions on the chat, which is great. All right, so green, we're going to move into the heart and into the vasculature. I want to start talking about the start of perimenopause. And typically that occurs in women when she's between about 31 to 40. So take a nice deep breath here. Let's honor our heart because our heart is connected to our lungs. So how we breathe is how we oxygenate our blood, right? Really important. Oxygen is life. And in fact, back to the mitochondria, the way that the mitochondria create energy is by using oxygen that we take in. So it starts at the big macro level where we take the breath in, but then it goes down to the blood, which carries oxygen, then eventually down to the cell, which then the mitochondria are using that oxygen to give you ATP, otherwise known as energy. So that energy, that life breath is giving you energy to do the everyday things that you really want to do. And many times we start to see cardiovascular health changing as a woman moves into her, I would say, 40s and 50s, especially when she goes through menopause. Now we start to see with the withdrawal of hormones, we start to see that things like lipids go up, cholesterol might go up, and she didn't even change anything. But it's because the hormones came down and the hormones were helping with keeping those lipids under control. So, ladies, definitely, if you are starting to go through perimenopause and into the menopause, see your doctor to get a complete, comprehensive lipid panel. Be looking at lipid particle number, particle size, oxidized LDL, not just total LDL, oxidized LDL. Look at the amount of inflammation in your cardiovascular network. Now, when I think of the heart, I'm also thinking about psychologically showing love, expanding through those blood vessels, how we give of service, how we devote time and energy to a cause that we have some passion for. But here is where women, I think in the perimenopause, they start to reflect on, oh, wow, I didn't take such good care of myself. I was so focused on everybody else. And now I feel like my life is chaotic. I feel like everything is going wrong. My body is changing. I can't keep up with all these changes. So she might start to have changes in her circulation. She might start to see the beginnings of varicose veins. Her heart rate might go up. Her blood pressure now might start to increase. So these are the times of life when we need to start to look at our nutrition, our lifestyle. How can we help with better circulation? How can we engage in more self care? How can we direct some of that energy from the fire of digestion and move that into our heart? Much like the gut and how much I talked about the gut there, our heart is connected to the gut microbiota. In fact, I actually teach cardiologists about nutrition. Cardiologists are really spot on with understanding nutrition. We know that there is a direct link between what we eat and heart health. And what is still the number one killer in industrialized societies? It's still heart disease. We cannot overlook heart disease, right? So, being in tune with the rhythms of the heart. And when Rhonda was talking about ways to measure things, one thing that you can measure, especially on an app, is called heart rate variability. Heart rate variability will tell you how you are doing as it relates to the function of the nervous system and stress. How well are you dealing with stress at the level of the heart and the brain? So keep that in mind. One of the things to keep our blood vessels wide, because what happens is as we become more, I would say, inflamed, we start to create this lining, we start to get more of this infiltration of a lot of immune cells in the blood vessel, and they become thick. And we can start to get calcification. So we get a narrowing and a tightening and a hardening of our blood vessels. And truly, the measure of healthy aging is flexibility. We want metabolic flexibility. We want neuronal flexibility. We want heart flexibility. And the way that we can do that through food is by bringing in green foods. The exception there is beets. Beets are filled with healthy nitrates. These are nitrates. And you might have said, but Deanna, I thought nitrates were unhealthy. Well, if we look at some processed meats and other sources, like sometimes you even find nitrates in water, these aren't always the healthy kinds, and then they're connected to a food or a water source that isn't healthy. What we're looking at here is the nitrates that nature provides, not what humans put in. So, what nature provides is nitrates in green leafy foods, especially things that are bitter. And what happens is when we take them into our mouth, in our saliva, we have microorganisms that already start to break them down, and they start to convert those nitrates slowly into nitric oxide, which is a gas. And that gas helps to open our blood vessels. So, what we end up seeing is decreased risk for things like hypertension or high blood pressure, atherosclerosis, chronic kidney disease, metabolic syndrome. So, what's the name of the game? The name of the game is to bring in your greens, bring in your bitter greens, arugula, watercress, any leafy green, and change them up. Get different colors of greens. The deeper the hue of the lettuce leaf, the more of the nutrients you are getting. The other thing I want to mention here is omega-3 fatty acids, which you can get from a supplement, but you can also get omega-3 fatty acids from the diet. You can get them through small fish like mackerel or herring or salmon. Salmon's a bit larger, but you can rotate fish sources if you do eat that. You can also get omega-3 fatty acids from nuts and seeds. So even flax seed, when you grind it up, can give you some of the omega-3 fats, but not exactly the ones that you need for this kind of reaction. The body has to do some work to convert them into the long chain EPA and DHA. But hands down, omega-3 fatty acids, that's what I did. Part of my PhD on was fatty acids, looking at the essential fats. And when we don't have a good balance of these fats, it can create all kinds of issues, including that of the heart. So here's kind of a summary for promoting healthy heart through the cycles of life. I didn't mention it outright, but magnesium and potassium need to be balanced with too much sodium, right? Magnesium is what we find in plant foods. It's like if we have iron at the heart of our red blood cell, in a plant, at the heart of chlorophyll is magnesium. So, by eating more plant green foods, we will get more magnesium, which of course we're already too short on. Vitamin K. Vitamin K is important. In fact, I think vitamin K is the next vitamin D. Vitamin K, especially vitamin K1, is what I'm talking about here, is found in plant foods. Folates. If you have high homocysteine on your lab test, it's telling us that you have low folate, which is a B vitamin. Very important for vessel health because when homocysteine goes high, the blood vessels can get damaged. Okay. So it's toxic to the blood vessels, which again, if you're thinking about circulation, varicose veins, and even having sensation and a sense of warmth down in the lower extremities, your feet, your calves, your thighs, you need to have healthy blood vessels, right? So, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, those nitrates, which are full, the leafy greens actually give you a lot of things. So, everything that I'm describing here, you can be getting from leafy greens. How do you want to prepare them? You want to steam them or have them raw. So, and then, of course, the omega 3s. All right. So then moving into menopause more closely, age 41 to 50, we start to look at things like metabolism. Oh, goodness, don't we? We start to look at the body weight. We start to feel like, oh my goodness, my body is changing. My metabolism isn't what it was always when I was younger. Why do I have this stubborn belly fat? What's happening? Why am I eating, but I'm still hungry? Right? So this is where we start to look at some changes in the endocrine system. And when we're thinking of hormones, many times the brain is signaling to the thyroid. The thyroid is connected to the ovaries. So when we have changes in the ovaries or adrenals or pancreas, sometimes they're connected to the thyroid. And the thyroid commands your mitochondria in every cell. Your thyroid gland produces thyroid hormone, which is establishing your metabolic rate. So your mitochondria is only doing what the thyroid gland is telling it to do. So, what do you do for nutrition here? Well, first and foremost, vitamin A. Remember when we were talking about vitamin A for ovaries and ovulation? Vitamin A is also important for healthy thyroid hormone production. We also need minerals to make thyroid hormone, things like selenium, which you find in a Brazil nut. That's one of the best sources. I try to get at least one Brazil nut pretty much every day. They're kind of expensive, but you only need about 1 to 2 because they're so rich in selenium. And selenium is good for so many things, including your thyroid. Now, sometimes we need a thyroid workup at this time of life because things are changing in our bodies through perimenopause, right? They could even happen earlier where we see thyroid changes. In fact, we're seeing a rise of autoimmune thyroid conditions. And sometimes this is because of toxins in our environment. The thyroid has been called the sentinel organ. What does that mean? That means that the thyroid is very sensitive to things that are happening in the environment. Look, you can see, and we have exposure most times of our thyroid gland to things like our computer. It's always apparent and it's always visible, and it's always, the skin there, we're just taking in much more. So when I think of thyroid, I'm often thinking of throat health. How is the mouth? Am I going in to see my dentist in order to look at my teeth and how I'm chewing? Chewing is connected to cognition. So if we have a good oral microbiome, we're keeping the throat healthy. This is part of thinking of thyroid health, which is the thyroid is nestled right there in the throat area. So be aware of that. So that includes a lot of different things. That's when I'm thinking of the thyroid, I think of this as the emotional birth canal of the body. We're birthing words, we're birthing our feelings through the throat. So this is showing you some of the micronutrients involved in thyroid function. Things like iron is important. So again, if a woman is iron deficient, she's premenopausal, we want to focus on iron sources. Black beans can be rich in iron, but not always bioavailable. Leafy greens can be rich in iron, not always bioavailable. You need to squeeze some lemon juice on it to help, because vitamin C and iron, they work really well as a pair. Vitamin D. Vitamin D, we all know, we've heard of vitamin D as a sunshine vitamin, right? But even some of us that get enough sunshine, it doesn't change our vitamin D. We need help. We need to get that from food sources, whether fortified food sources or supplemental sources. That can help the thyroid gland. So the first thing that I think of with goodness, so many different body systems, I do think of vitamin D and getting that tested twice per year. Once in March at what would be the lowest part, you're coming off of winter then, and then once in September. So one at about this time of year so that you can see what your high would be, and making sure that you're at the sweet spot of vitamin D. Your gut microbiome, again, help to change the immune response, which can then change thyroid function. It's amazing. This little gland is subject to so much, I would say, influence and interference. You also have iodine, which is part of making thyroid hormone. Iodine and selenium need to be in balance, right? These two at the bottom here. So if you do have an autoimmune thyroid condition, you need to see the doctor and manage your iodine and your selenium levels to be sure that they are truly in balance. And don't forget to take care of the gut. When I think of taking things in, and I know we just have a couple minutes here, we think about eating consciously, taking time with eating, creating more satiety, bringing in some sea plants to give us fiber, and to just take time in the way of eating slow. During this time of life, we may need to look at our other endocrine organs, like our adrenals. Like, are we too ramped up, amped up still? Do we need to calm the adrenals, calm down the cortisol? Do we need to look to the reproductive system and look at estrogen and progesterone and testosterone? Again, the gut, the heart, and the thyroid are very much connected. So if we're taking care of heart nutrition with a lot of those leafy greens and omega 3s, that's going to help the thyroid. But sometimes we need targeted thyroid nutrients to make that thyroid hormone in healthy amounts. So many of those sea plants, nori, dulse, wakame, I know that in Asia, they have a lot of these sea plants. They're rich in minerals, especially iodine. But sometimes they can be not so good. So you need to just make sure that you buy a good source of sea plants, start experimenting, make some broths. But in general, your thyroid needs those minerals. And then we're going to close out on menopause, looking at the pituitary gland. We're moving up to the brain here. We're going to be focusing on brain health and nutrition. Here's where, when we go through menopause, we start to have some changes in our mood, in our ability to cognitate, and whether or not our cognition is at its full level. We may not deal with stress as well. We may start to see our menstrual cycle has now dwindled down. Our sleep is not so robust. And we begin to reevaluate our definition of life. We know that estrogen throughout our life of when we had it was favorably impacting the brain. We have estrogen receptors in the brain. So when we take away estrogen, what can happen is we start to see changes in cognition and changes in mood, which is why bringing in things like those phytoestrogens when we can would be a healthy thing to do. So when I think of plants here to nourish the brain, I think of purple, blue foods. So just think of blue for the brain. Blueberries, grapes, Concord grapes, a little bit of Concord grape juice. Excellent. Flavonoids in foods like even cocoa. Cocoa, a cup of herbal tea, green tea, oolong tea, black tea, all filled with flavonoids, which are really important for the brain and establishing healthy mood. And I've also done some research on maca. There are certain maca products that can help with ensuring that we're nourishing the brain endocrine centers to properly signal things like the adrenals, thyroid, and ovaries. Choline. Choline is neuroprotective. The adequate intake level for choline is 425 milligrams per day. We get choline from eggs and beef liver, which I don't really favor, but I have eggs once in a while. And so choline is part of acetylcholine, which helps with memory. So we might not need to start to look at our choline sources. Also, protein. We need to be looking at protein and its effects on neurotransmitters, making sure that we have enough protein in our daily diet because they are what create serotonin, melatonin, dopamine, GABA. A lot of our neurotransmitters, they're all coming from protein. So if we fall short on protein, we cannot make those neurotransmitters. So again, here's just a short list building upon everything else that we've talked about. I didn't mention it, but the brain is actually quite fatty. So we need proper fats. And again, those omega-3 fatty acids are important, as would be the adequate protein, the choline, and potentially some of those plants that I mentioned to help to signal the endocrine system better. And then finally, if we just look at the final stage of life, we're looking at being in sync with nature, circadian rhythm, seasonal rhythm. We might, in our 60s, 70s, 80s, and on up, we're looking at our sense of connection and purpose and meaning of life. Here's where we want to look at vitamin D and melatonin. Rhonda was saying that she's not sleeping so well. As we go into our 50s, our level of melatonin produced by the pineal gland in darkness goes down. So many times we start not to sleep as well. There can be other reasons for that, like increased inflammation. So plant melatonin can be useful here. Eating in the circadian rhythm, making sure we're not eating too late at night. Making sure that we're consistent with our meal times is also important, even for healthy sleep. And that really speaks to just making sure we're eating at certain times of the day and eating in season. I'm speeding up here because I know I'm at the end, but I just want to leave you with eating seasonal foods and how important that is. So when we are in this time of life, and I would say every part of life, I really want us to focus on circadian rhythm and honoring the day-night cycle. And again, not eating too late. So you have all this. I've got the 2-pager, which is going to summarize all of this for you, all of the general principles about macronutrients, micronutrients, the plant compounds. How do you personalize even different types of lifestyle behaviors? And also, just how do you be more creative throughout your whole life, not just through the reproductive period? So I want to thank you. I want to thank Rhonda, MESSA. I want to thank everybody. And Rhonda, I'm open for any questions if we do have
Thank
time.
you so much. Oh my goodness, such great information. And as you see in the chat, there are a lot of questions. I'm going to have to limit them. I'm going to ask a couple, but you know what? I've been on Facebook a little. I follow Dr. Deanna on Facebook, and she just posted as she was talking. This woman can multitask. As she was talking, she posted on yams and the science behind yams and how great they are for us. So I want you to follow her on Facebook, follow her on Instagram, and go to www.Deanna Minich. But here are some questions. Dr.
Sure.
Deanna, from Kana, why is it so difficult to lose any weight? Does the menopause also increase body and joint pain?
Yes and yes. And why does it happen? Why does it become difficult? Because the thyroid can change. We don't The short answer is we lose the hormones that are responsible for kind of ramping up our metabolic fire. We're starting to lose the estrogen, we lose the progesterone, and those were important for helping us with body weight. So that's why sometimes in that second half of life, we actually kind of have to work harder, and it's not so much just the walking aerobic
Yes.
activity, it's also the weight bearing. If we build muscle, we build the metabolic capacity.
Mhm.
Now, here's just one quick hack. It's more than a hack, it's actually a lifestyle strategy. Green tea, having 2 to 3 cups of green tea and making sure we get those polyphenols can help us to burn more efficiently and help us with metabolism, by the way.
Excellent. Green tea. Everybody is going to get their green tea. I love that. Here's a question from Becky. I've had achy legs since menopause started 2 years ago. Is there a supplement that can help with that?
Start with omega-3 fatty acids. Start by going to your doctor, check out your level of omega-3s. I can anticipate they might be low. I mean, omega-3s is the number one thing I would be thinking about when it comes to inflammation. And as we go through menopause, inflammation goes higher because we are not protected by estrogen anymore. So making sure we have proper levels of omega-3s, that's the first thing I would think of. Otherwise, make sure that you're bringing in curry or turmeric into your cooking. Very
Okay.
potent anti-inflammatory. The only thing is to note that if you're on medication, that these different things, omega-3s and turmeric, can interact with medications and actually make them work more efficient. Like you'll
Yes.
actually be reducing blood pressure, reducing blood
Yes.
sugar. So you may have to adjust those medications.
Yes, yes. Always work with your healthcare provider, your doctor, your nurse practitioner, team with them. So Heidi mentioned she's using turmeric, and it helps. So we're hearing right now, Heidi, adding it to food is the best way versus a supplement, is what Dr. Deanna is saying. I actually take it as a tincture and I drink it as tea, but I also add it in dishes as well. A couple more questions while our next speaker is getting ready. Angela, she's asking, why has cellulite taken over my body during this stage of life?
Lack of movement. So what ends up happening is the when we lose estrogen, our collagen gets kind of, I would say, weaker, and things start to leak on through. So it looks kind of like cottage cheese, right? We've got that cellulite. So what we need to do in that case is collagen, vitamin C for good collagen integrity. Don't overlook vitamin C. Many of us have too little vitamin C, and we need to move. When we sit in one place and we're sitting down, it's creating collection, right? Stagnation. We need to, like Rhonda's doing, she's standing. If you get a standing desk,
Mhm.
move every hour, move for that 10 minutes. You got to keep the circulation moving and then clear out that space, right? You need more fluid potentially. Drink water throughout the day. Half your body weight in ounces. If you weigh 150 pounds, that's about 75 ounces of water throughout the day. Less at meals, more throughout the day so that you're hydrating. Look at your skin. Is it supple or is it dry? Does your skin tent? Does it stay up when you pick it up, or does it go down right away? If it goes down right away, you might be more hydrated. If it stays up, you're dehydrated.
Great, great information. So the next question has to do with well, with hydration. My own personal question. We're hearing a lot about water, mineral water or electrolyte water, and regular water isn't adequate. We're not really addressing the hydration need. Can you speak to that?
Yes. Don't fall for a lot of the electrolyte products with sugar. Your electrolyte product should not have sugar. But I do think that putting a little bit of sea salt, Himalayan crystal salt in water, which has trace minerals, can, believe it or not, help with the uptake of water because water follows a little bit of that salt, right? So just putting a little bit of that in water could be good. And that could be just natural electrolytes. There are other products that you can get, but just read the label. Do not take in sugar with those electrolytes. For example, I use a magnesium powder that has a little bit of stevia. So that's not sugar, it's a little bit of stevia, but that's actually what I'm drinking right now. You see how my water's not clear? It has magnesium in it. And that is also helping with the uptake. So look into magnesium type of products or even a little bit of salt. Again, that pink salt, just a little bit in your water
Mhm.
should help with electrolytes. But check with your practitioner to get your minerals tested to find out what you actually need.
Gotcha, gotcha. Love it. Another question. Magnesium. What type of magnesium supplement? Last question.
Yeah. There are many. Okay. So if you just want magnesium to go into your body to help your cells, magnesium glycinate or magnesium citrate. Those would be good forms. If you want it for your brain, magnesium threonate. That starts with a T, Threonate. It's a special kind of magnesium for the brain. I would say not to do magnesium oxide. That for some people just gives them diarrhea. You want to take the magnesium in, not eliminate it. So magnesium citrate, magnesium glycinate, and if you want it for the brain, magnesium threonate.
Excellent, excellent information. I just love this stuff. I could listen to it all day. Like I said, follow her on Instagram, follow her on Facebook, Deanna Minich.com. You'll
Yeah,
get the handout. If I could have her here all day, I would. I promise you I would. I would try to find a way where we could just keep her here and just, it's amazing, amazing. Right, Larissa? I love this information. And we might bring her back again for another conference if I can talk her into it. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. We
thank
appreciate
you.
the
Thanks,
information.
everybody. Enjoy. Thank you,
Yes,
Rhonda.
thank you. And to address, as far as functional medicine doctors, integrative health medicine doctors with your MESSA, I know you're wondering right now, I have an integrative health doctor. And what I do is I find doctors that practice allopathic medicine as well as functional medicine. So they're my regular family physician, but if I have functional medicine needs or integrative health needs, they can address them. And what I do, so my doctor visit is covered by MESSA, but the labs may not be covered that are functional medicine nature labs. So what you want to do, I would suggest, this is just a tip because I like you guys, everybody in here, 160, you are my friends now, and I'm gonna give you an insider, is you locate a participating physician that has integrative health or functional medicine skills. They are educated in that manner. It could be a medical doctor, MD. It could be a doctor of osteopathic medicine. They are allopathic physicians. That means regular medical model, but they understand functional medicine. They understand hormone needs and a lot of the things Dr. Deanna just talked about. That's one way to do it. Now, if you are finding you need a functional, or you have your favorite, or your friend told you about a certain functional medicine doctor and you want to see them, and they all are MDs or DOs. Most of them don't bill insurance anyway, right? So what you would do is you would ask them to give you a copy of a claim for a visit. And you can talk to your MESSA field rep, or you can talk to member services and let them review the claim, the potential claim, and show you what your MESSA would cover. And then everything else you would be responsible for. So you would probably have to pay up front. And then those things that are covered by MESSA, you could work with MESSA. Okay, so any of those types of questions, and please go to our website. A lot of the questions that I noticed on the list, have them ready, on the list are probably answered on her website. She has lots of information that could be downloaded. And her Facebook page, she posts, as we were in this conference, her team was posting information, and she engages in the chat as well. So definitely check her out there.